The wagon came up from the valley floor when the morning was still blue with cold, and the birch trees along the creek line had not yet caught any sun. She had seen it off the main road from the ridge, where she had been checking the east fence since before full light. Her coat was open at the collar. She had stopped minding the cold 2 winters ago. She watched it come. The man driving sat the way men from cities tend to sit in country wagons, upright, a little careful, the reins held too high. He had sent a letter through the postmaster in Ashcroft, which she had read once and left on the desk for 3 days before she wrote back. "You are welcome to come out. I will hear what you have to say." She had not signed it with anything beyond her initials. There was no one to ask whether that was wise. There had not been anyone to ask for some time now. The mill was behind her, catching the early light at the roof line. The new cedar shingles she had put on the east-facing slope last September were bright against the gray of the older boards. She had done half of them herself, working with a mallet and a pry bar on one side of the roof at a time. The other half she had hired Beaton's boy from town to finish, and she had watched him from the yard to make sure he was taking the nails straight. She had been in the Nicola Valley for 3 years, 4 months, and a number of days. She had stopped counting sometime in the second winter. She had arrived with a trunk, a sewing case, $40 in her coat, and a letter from a man she had never met, written in a hand that was careful and already tired. She had left Ontario in March of 1891 on a CPR train that smelled of coal smoke and the wool of other people's coats, watching the shield give way to the flat of the prairies, and then, after a long time, the mountains rising out of the ground like something that had always been there and had simply decided to be seen. She had not known what she was coming to. She had known only that she was 29 years old, that the man she had been married to was 3 years in the ground, that a letter had arrived in February with an offer in it, and that she had said yes. The train reached Ashcroft on a Wednesday afternoon, and the platform was not empty. She had known it would not be. A woman arriving on the CPR without a husband and with a single trunk was worth watching, and the people of small interior towns had long memories for things worth watching. She stepped down from the car, and the cold came at her, sharper than Ontario cold, drier, with a quality to it that moved through her coat, as if the coat were beside the point. She stood on the platform and let her eyes adjust to the width of the valley opening up around the town in a way she had no comparison for. He was at the far end of the platform, holding his hat in both hands. She knew him by the posture, a man standing apart from the others, not because he had chosen to, but because the illness had already made distance of the space around him. He was in his mid-60s, thinner than the letter had suggested, and he stood with the slight forward lean of a man whose chest had been troubling him long enough that straightening up had stopped being worth the effort. She picked up her sewing case and walked toward him. He watched her come with a steadiness she recognized. The way you watch something you are not sure of arriving, and have decided you are going to be honest about not being sure. When she reached him, he said her name, uncertain of it the way a man is uncertain of a name he has only seen written. She said, "Is it far?" Something shifted in his face, not exactly relief. 8 miles, he said. "I have the wagon." She nodded. She did not look at the women near the dry goods counter who were watching. She followed him down the platform steps, and the mountains were there to the west, still carrying snow well into March, and the wagon horse was a roan with sound legs, and she had not noticed until now how tired she was. The property came into view as the light was going. She had not known what she expected, something more finished perhaps. The mill building stood, but the south wall was bowing outward where the foundation had settled, propped with a timber that had been there a long time. The flume running down the hillside from the log pond above was missing boards in 3 places. The horse barn needed a new roof. The fence along the near pasture sagged on the downhill side. She took this in without saying anything. He helped her down from the wagon and went to see to the horse, and she stood in the yard in the last of the light and looked at the mill. A lamp was burning in the window of the main house. She had not expected that. She looked at it for a moment, then went inside. In the 3rd year, she can walk the full property in the dark without thinking about it. She knows which boards on the mill floor are soft and where to step. She knows which section of the flume tends to ice over first in hard cold. And she knows by the sound of the boiler whether it needs water before she checks the gauge. She learned all of it in the first 3 weeks, because in the first 3 weeks she understood that she needed to. The ledger was in the desk in the mill office, beneath a map of the timber license area. The debt was $900 owed to the Bank of British Columbia in Kamloops, with interest accruing since the previous spring. She sat with the ledger open for a long time. The main saw blade was cracked along the upper third. Cracked, not broken, still running, but running the way things run when they are about to stop. The boiler seals were original. The flume above the log pond was losing water through the gaps, which meant the logs were not moving down properly, which meant production was lower than it should have been, which explained some portion of the ledger, but not all of it. On the second morning, he came to stand in the mill doorway while she was in there, measuring with her eyes what she could not yet put in numbers. He said her name, closer to right this time. He said, "I should have told you more before you wrote back." She was looking at the blade. She said, "Where do you keep the shims for the saw carriage?" He found them himself in a wooden box under the workbench. Then he took her through the rest of it. The timber license boundaries, the contract he had let lapse with the Merritt Mill, the 2 hired men whose wages were 3 weeks behind. He moved through the property the way a man moves when he is making an accounting that has been delayed too long. She followed and said very little. They both understood what this was. He was settling accounts with a place he would not hold much longer. By the end of February, he was not coming to the mill before noon. She kept herself outside in the mornings, checking the flume, measuring the log pond, giving him the privacy of his difficulty. The cold helped. It gave her hands something to do. The work was real, and it did not require her to decide anything yet about what she owed or what came next. He died on a Friday in early April, not with any drama. She had been down at the log pond since before 6, clearing the bark debris blocking the intake gate. When she came back to the house, the quality of the stillness was different from sleep, and she knew before she crossed to him. She stood at the foot of the bed for a moment. Then she went to the window. The lamp was on the sill where he had always kept it, dented on one side from some old incident she had never asked about. She did not move it. She stood there with the cold still coming off her coat until she was ready to turn and do what came next. The lawyer's office was above the land registry in Ashcroft, up a narrow stair that turned once at the landing. His name was Elgin. He had ink on his left hand and the careful expression of a man who has prepared himself to deliver difficult news to someone who cannot afford to receive it badly. There was a strong box on his desk. He opened it with a small key and removed a stack of papers. He read the deed first, then he set it down and looked at her. He said the timber license had been amended in January, before she had arrived, before she had written her reply, before she had ever been west of Winnipeg. The man had added her name to the license as co-holder, her full name, her Ontario name, in the amended filing with the land office. She asked him to read that part again. He did. Then he set the paper down and looked at her the way he had been preparing to look. He said the debt of $900 would pass with the property. He said this with a small pause before the number. He said that, given the condition of the mill and the extent of the obligation, she might want to consider what he called arranging a managed disposition before the position became untenable. She waited until he had finished the sentence. She asked for a copy of the license amendment and the deed both. He said he could have copies prepared by the following Thursday. She said she would wait. He looked at the strongbox. Then he got up and went to the back of the office where the copying press was. She sat in the chair and looked out the window at the main street of Ashcroft. The mountains to the west were clear, the snow line sitting lower than it had any right to for April. He brought her the copies. She folded them once along the length and placed them in her sewing case beneath the gray thread and the bone-handled scissors and the oilcloth wrapped around the spare needles. She thanked him. She stood. She went back down the stairs into the cold and drove the 8 miles back with the copies in her case. and nothing decided except that the license had her name on it, and that was something she had not had when she came down those stairs. April brought mud. May brought the cold back for 2 weeks, which nobody who lived there seemed to find unusual. June brought the flume down. It went in the night. A section of the upper run, rotted at the supports where standing water had worked on the wood all autumn, let go in a single failure. 40 feet of trough dropped into the hillside. Without the flume moving logs down from the pond, the mill could not run. Without the mill running, she had nothing. She was up the hill at first light with a lantern and a measuring rod, in the sharp cold that sits at 4 in the morning in the BC interior even in June. She stood in the gap where the flume had been and looked at what the repair would require. New timber, new supports, new ironwork at the joints, a full rebuild of the section above the first turn. She did not have enough lumber of the right dimension. She did not have the ironwork. She had the tools, and she had her hands, and she had the younger of the 2 hired men, whose name was Muirhead, and who showed up that morning without being sent for, which told her something about him she had not known before. On the second morning, a wagon came up the road from the east. She had not seen the man before, a rancher from the property 2 miles over in his 40s with a quiet way of moving. His wagon was loaded with milled timber of the right dimension and a coil of new wire rope. He stopped at the bottom of the hill and looked up at where she and Muirhead were working. He said he had the timber left over from a repair on his own barn. He said it the way you say a simple fact about the weather, not an offer requiring consideration, just a statement of what was available and where it could go. She said she could use it. He and Muirhead unloaded it. She kept her hands on the wire rope she had been working and watched and did not say anything more, because she did not yet know the weight of an offer made without conditions, and she did not want to speak before she understood it. When the wagon was empty, he climbed back onto the seat. He said, "The second support from the top, the iron bracket, it wants to be doubled." She looked up at the support. He was right. She had not got to it yet, but he was right. She said, "I know." He nodded once. Then he turned the wagon and went back down the road the way he had come. She used the timber. The flume was rebuilt in 6 days. When she came down from the hill on the 6th evening and looked up at it against the last light, it was straight and it was sound, and she stood there a while and let the sound of the water moving through it be the only sound. The second year brought a dry summer and kept it. By July, the creek below the property had dropped to a thread of itself. The timber on the upper license was under threat. The whole valley was dry, and for 3 weeks in August, the smoke from a fire to the north came and went and sat in her clothes and in the curtains of the mill office. She had been thinking about Norquay for 6 months. He operated the mill in Merritt, 20 miles south, and he had been buying raw timber from outfits in the valley at rates that were consistent if not generous. She had watched the pattern of it through what she could learn from the postmaster and the feed merchant and the general movement of wagons on the valley road. She knew what his mill was taking, what it was paying, and what it needed that it was not currently getting from anyone else. She sent word through the postmaster asking whether Norquay had interest in a supply arrangement. She named a volume and a price per 1,000 board feet. She did not propose terms yet. She waited. He came on a Thursday. A Thursday told her something about his options. He was a compact man, methodical, with the habit of looking at the ground when he was thinking. He walked the timber access road with her and said nothing for a time. Then he talked about the fire risk, about the road condition in spring, about the unreliability of supply from operations this size. He said risk in several different ways. She listened to all of it without response. When he named a figure, it was low. She said so without heat, the way she would say the boiler pressure was reading off. She told him what the timber was worth per 1,000 on the Kamloops market that season with the fire scarcity factored in. And she told him what it cost her to deliver to his mill gate, and she told him what a fair margin looked like on the difference. He looked at the ground. She waited. She looked at the smoke haze sitting above the north ridge and thought about the second payment coming due in November. He talked some more. She did not respond to the talking. 40 minutes is a long time to say nothing, and she knew it, and she let it be. He came up to her number in the end, working toward it in increments, the way a man does when he wants to feel he arrived there on his own reasoning. When he said the number she had been holding, she said, "Fine." Not yes, not good, fine. He shook her hand. His grip had some surprise in it. She made the first debt payment in October of the second year. She drove herself the 22 miles to Kamloops and walked into the Bank of British Columbia in the dress she had arrived in, which was still a good dress. She set the money on the counter, $300. The teller counted it twice. He went to get the branch manager, which had not been requested. The branch manager shook her hand in a manner meant to read as warmly congratulatory that landed somewhere closer to startled. She took the receipt. She folded it into her coat. She drove back through the dark and arrived at the property a little after 10. And the lamp was on the sill in the mill office where she had left it, and Muirhead had banked the boiler down properly before he left for the evening, and she put the wagon up and went to bed. On a Saturday in late September of the third year, she walked the full property the way she had not walked it since the first week, the whole perimeter, without stopping to work anything, just looking. She started at the mill at first light. The new shingles on the east slope caught the early sun. The saw blade had been replaced in the second winter by a man she had found through the mill supplier in Kamloops, who had charged her $60 and had not once made her explain why she was running the place alone. She had put her hand on the blade when it was installed and found it solid. It had run 3 seasons without trouble. She walked up the flume line. The rebuilt section was holding. She had checked the iron brackets in July and found them sound. The second support from the top, the one the man from the east property had pointed out that second morning on the hill, was holding better than any of the others. She went up to the timber license boundary on the ridge. The stand was intact. The fire had gone north in August instead of south, and the timber she had contracted to Norquay was standing and would stand through another season. She looked out over the valley from the ridge and let the shape of it sit in her for a while. She came back down and went through the mill. The soft board she knew to step around, the boiler gauge reading steady, the saw carriage guides clean, everything where it should be. The lamp was on the sill in the mill office, dented on one side, sitting at its slight angle because the sill was not level and she had not corrected it in 3 years and did not intend to. She had not moved it from the spot where she first found it. She stood at the window for a long time. Outside, the valley held the light of early October. Gold without urgency, the kind that does not ask anything of you. He came on a Monday morning the following week. She heard the horse before she saw it. A good horse, clean-gaited, brushed daily by someone paid to do it. He tied it at the post and walked to the mill office door with his hat at his side, deliberate, a man who had done this before. He was perhaps 55, well-dressed for the interior, with a watch chain and the measured patience of a man who has learned that patience reads as a form of generosity. He introduced himself and his firm. Vancouver, he said, timber consolidation along the river systems. He had come a long way and she let him say so. They stood outside because she had not invited him in. He spoke about the valley first, the railway expansion north of Cache Creek, the freight rates shifting, what the timber market would look like in 5 years as the lower valley stands gave out, and the interior operations became the primary source. He spoke knowledgeably, and she listened to all of it because it was all true. He said, what she had done with the property was extraordinary, and she believed he meant it the way men mean something when they are about to use it as a handle. He said that a woman alone in the interior, carrying a debt that had taken years to bring down, deserved the chance to begin again somewhere with fewer variables. He used the word stability twice. He used the word opportunity once. Then he said the number, $4,500. She let it stand. She thought about the timber license with her name on it, registered in January before she had ever been west of the Ontario border. She thought about the saw blade running clean. She thought about the flume rebuilt in 6 days with timber from a neighbor who had asked for nothing. She thought about the ledger in the mill office drawer, which showed $210 remaining on the original 900. 210, not 900. She thought about the third payment already sitting in an envelope in the desk beside the ledger, waiting for the drive to Kamloops. She said, "I appreciate the offer." He smiled. She said, "It's a fair one." He nodded, ready for what he thought was coming next. She began walking toward the gate. After a moment he followed, his boots careful on the uneven ground. At the gate she turned and extended her hand. He shook it, uncertain now of the sequence. He said something about leaving the offer open, about the post, about how circumstances changed, and there was no obligation in any direction. She listened to all of it. Then she unlatched the gate and held it while he passed through and latched it again on the other side. She stood at the fence and did not watch his horse go down the road. The mill was behind her. The sound of the valley came back once the hoofbeats faded. The creek, the trees, the particular quiet of a property that has been worked into a particular order. She turned east along the fence line and began walking, not because she had chosen to, but because her feet knew the perimeter. The frost was light on the ground, a thin white along the base of each post that would be gone by mid-morning and leave no trace. She walked slowly. The timber license boundary marker was on the ridge. She had set that post herself in the second year, using the survey coordinates from Elgin's office, and a level she had borrowed from Muirhead and not returned because he had not asked for it back. She knew the exact corner of what was hers to within a foot in any direction. The mill debt stood at $210. The third payment, $80, documented, was in the desk. After that, one more, and it was done. She had already run the numbers. The Norquay contract was renewed for another season at the same rate she had set, which was the rate she intended to hold. The boiler wanted new seals come spring, already priced. Muirhead had asked in August whether there was a permanent position, and she had said yes before he finished the question. She stopped at the corner post and put her hand flat on the top of it. Cold wood, solid. She had said it well, and she knew it. She saw him before she heard him. The man from 2 miles east, moving along his own fence line in the same pale light, going the same direction she was, north along his eastern boundary, parallel to her path. He did not look up. She did not call out. The distance between them stayed constant, and the direction stayed the same, and they moved that way. For a while, each on their own land, each in their own morning, the ridge ahead pale and wide, and neither of them in any hurry. She noticed, after some time, that she had been watching the frost at the base of the fence posts rather than the ridge ahead. She stopped and looked up and let the full shape of the property come into her at once. The mill roof below, the flume line on the hillside, the timber stand on the ridge, the lamp she could not see from here, but knew was on the sill where it had been since the first evening she arrived. The deed in the desk with her name on it. The ledger with figures that had finally moved in the right direction and kept moving. $900, and it would be nothing by spring. A property given to her in ruin had kept her through 3 winters and was going into a 4th with soundboards and a running blade and a signed contract and $210 standing between her and clear title. She had not sold a single thing she had built. She picked up her pace along the fence line, turned her face into the cold morning air, and went back to work.